Welcome everybody to our webinar on heat stress in horses in 2023. One of the things that we need to be cognizant of, because a lot of times these signs can just go by the wayside. Maybe we don't notice them. We think, oh, maybe the horse is just a little tired or he ate something different. But heat stress is really, really dangerous in people and in horses. But if you notice, and if you've been riding um, on the hotter part of the day and you notice that the breathing rate um, is high, more than 60 breaths per minute, and you can just put your ear up to their mouth or watch their nostrils and use your watch and you can tell their breathing rate. One of the worst things that can happen is that they will go off their food or water intake will go down. And so obviously if a horse is hot and dehydrated, the first thing you want them to do is drink water. But unfortunately, they sometimes will pass the point of no return where they don't even want to drink water. So we need to be careful of that. Rectal temperature above 103, increased heart rate. Again, you can if you have a stethoscope, you can do that right where you do up the girth. Or if you go down into the bottom of the leg, right in the pastern there, you can take their digital pulse. Profuse sweating, or again, like the water intake, stopping drinking water when they are sweating and then they all of a sudden just stop sweating. That is really bad when they stop sweating. Ears will start to droop, get lethargic, depressed, dehydration. Again, you can do that pinch test, press your capillary refill time, press your thumb on their gum. And if it doesn't, if the blood color doesn't come back within 2 seconds, then you know we're starting to get some dehydration. Skin pinch test, right in that triangle in the neck where you would give, a sub-Q injection. You can pull the skin up, make a tent, and if it doesn't just snap back into place, if it takes a couple of seconds, then we also know that the horse is dehydrated. Muscle cramping. So sore hindquarters, might start to think your horse is tying up. Dehydration is one of the causes for tying up. Colic-like symptoms also, these are all signs of heat stress, and heat stress then can lead to tying up, it can lead to colic, all kinds of things. So it's really important that we're looking out for these signs of stress. Um, it depends on the exercise that the horse is doing, um, but something like thoroughbred racehorses when they're racing, so peak competition, um, that so quickly increases their core body temperature. When it's hot and humid outside, um, it takes a lot more cooling mechanisms, and a lot of the fans and things just become ineffective. So um, it's really important that we utilize, whether it be cooling fans with misting water or wetting the horse. Don't scrape the horse off because it actually slows the cooling process down. Leave the cold water on them. Yes, the water will get warmer, but again, leave the water on them. It's better. It causes that evaporation more effectively. Horses that are at higher risk of heat stress are thin horses, fat horses, old horses, horses that don't have any shade. Maybe they're in stalls or trailers. So if you're trailering horses in the heat, try to do it early in the morning or late at night. Getting your horse out of the stall or allowing them to walk out of the stall. I know a lot of people will put horses into stalls during the day, thinking you're getting them out of the sun. But if the stall's not ventilated well and you don't have a lot of airflow, then that actually can be more detrimental. Horses that are very heavily muscled will also struggle with dissipating heat. and if, let's say, you live in the northern states and you're going down to Florida, or you're going to Texas to compete, or you're even coming to Virginia to compete, and your horse isn't used to it, then um, if the horse is not acclimated to that hotter, more humid temperatures, then it's going to be more difficult. They're at a higher risk of heat stress. How does a horse get rid of excess heat? By pushing blood flow to the skin. So also a really hot horse is going to have much slower digestive capacity, right? And he's also a really hot horse is going to have less actual performance because the blood is no longer in the digestive system helping absorb nutrients, and it's not in the muscles feeding oxygen to the muscles and other nutrients to increase performance. It's flowed all the way to the skin to try and help dissipate that heat. Sweating eliminates about 70% of heat generated by exercise. So again, if your horse stops sweating, that's really bad. And breathing rapidly also when they're exchanging that air. So hot air goes out, cool air goes in. That will also eliminate up to about 15% of that heat load. But again, if the outside air is also very hot and humid, then it decreases that effectiveness. When the resting body temperature, so if you take a rectal temperature on the horse, it should be between 99 and 100. Once that rectal temperature is 103 or above, then we know the horse is overheating. Or above 103, we know that they're overheating. Anywhere from that, 100 to 103, that's normal, that their temperature will elevate during exercise, but above 103, we know they're overheating. Above 106, and that is heat stroke, and we are in very severe situation at that point. So we talk about, it's not just about the body temperature of the horse, but it's also the relative humidity. So if we add the temperature and the relative humidity together, then we get a score. So if the number of those two combined is 130 or less, we have no concerns. So let's say it's 88 degrees Fahrenheit outside and we have 40% relative humidity, then we're going to be looking at like 129, and we're totally fine. We don't have any issues. But once we get above 130, now it might mean you've got cooler external temperatures, but it's very high humidity. So if we say, 75 is not very hot, but let's say we do, let's go 133 minus 75. So if we've got even just 58% relative humidity, combined with 75 degree temperatures, then we're at 133 of that kind of heat index. And that again would be into that medium risk. Make sure you're taking breaks and cooling them and resting them. So I think that when the outside temperature is very hot, we're all cautious and we be careful. But if it's not that hot, but the relative humidity is high, remember, evaporative cooling, that's sweating, the horse sweats and then evaporates, and that's how they cool down. If they sweat, but it's so humid in the air that the air can't suck any more moisture away, wick any moisture away, then the horse is not going to be able to cool down, even though the external temperature, air temperature, isn't that high. So we need to make sure when the relative humidity is high, we're also being cognizant of taking breaks, cooling them down. So if that combined numbers between 150 and 180, or 151 and 180, that's high risk. Do very light work only early in the morning, late at night. Be looking for heat stress, cooling them down actively. If it's above 180, really just don't exercise. This slide is something that every barn should have laminated and stuck on the wall with feeding charts and kind of normal resting temperatures for horses. This should be laminated and on the barn wall. So if you want to cool an overheated horse, what are you going to do? Well, immediately move them to the shade so they don't have that UV light shining on them. Give them plenty of fresh water. You can, at that point, put salt in the water to force them to drink, or give them, say, some electrolyte paste, or give them some salt in their mouth, and that will force them to drink. Um, Increase the airflow, use a fan, or put them in a breezeway where there's an actual breeze. And then cool water, spray the head, back, neck, rump, legs with cool water. You can use ice packs over the jugular veins. Make sure you're calling your veterinarian when the temperature stays above 103 degrees and you can't get it below that. Continue to monitor the horse for the next few days, because what the problem is, when the horse goes through any kind of stress, whether it was, let's say the barn was on fire and they were severely stressed, heat stress, um, uh, a pretty severe colic that they've overcome, or a choke incident, anything that's really stressed them out, you've got to monitor the horses for the next few days, because that stress a couple of days later can actually turn into laminitis or colic. Especially when you think you're out of the woods and then that occurs. So we want to make sure that we're not scraping the horse down, okay? Because when you scrape the horse down, um, it only do that in the wintertime, because it actually keeps the horses warmer. Um, don't scrape the horse down when it's really hot, because it helps to dissipate that heat. I actually saw recently another study that looked at, if you did scrape the horse, it took an extra 10 to 12 minutes to cool them down. And when you've got a really hot horse, you don't have 10 to 12 minutes. You need to get them cool as quick as you possibly can. So um, here we're looking at, so we've got some other nutrients or minerals in our DAC supplements, namely chromium. And chromium, we've talked about, chromium unleashes more energy for the horse, and that energy, that glucose, can then be used to prioritize dissipating stress. Well, stress comes when the horse gets very hot. And you can see here we have the dashed lines are when the horse was given chromium, and the solid line is the control, no supplement. So the yellow solid line and dash line, that's thermoneutral. Like, we're not overheating the horse. And so you can see that there's no difference between those lines, either in the rectal temperature or the respiration rate, because we're not heat stressing the horses. But when the orange lines are when we actually stress the horses with um, hot temperatures. And you can see that the dashed line, which are the animals that were supplied chromium, had less rectal temperature and lower respiration rate. So the chromium in the DAC products can actually really help with horses dealing with stress, in particular heat stress. So the Chemtrace chromium in the racing formula, the eBoost paste, and in the DAC metabolic. So if you're feeding any one of those, then you're going to get the benefits of the chromium. And maybe in your summer program, let's say you have a barrel racing horse, for example, and usually the horse is on orange or total performance, then maybe you move to the racing formula through the summertime, knowing that it's giving you that extra chromium. Water intake. I was just saying to someone the other day, you can say to a person that they need to give a horse 5 to 15 gallons of water a day, but when you put a visual to it, so 5 to 15 milk jugs, people are more likely to, oh wow, that's actually a lot of water that a horse needs to drink. So they may need up to 30 gallons of water per day, depending on how hot it is, how humid it is, and the level of exercise they're doing. Things that will stimulate them to drink: hay. Giving a horse hay will stimulate them to drink. Giving them electrolytes, making sure they have access to free choice salt. This will all stimulate them to drink. As we've mentioned, some of those signs of dehydration, lack of focus, no interest in drinking, no interest in eating, fatigue like symptoms. It's amazing how much sweat is lost after exercise. So a horse eventing, 3 hours, you're doing your dressage, you're doing warm up, you're doing show jumping, you're doing cross country, all at a 1 day event, in 1 day, you might lose up to 66 pounds, 20 to 60 pounds of sweat loss. Um, Endurance racing, 10 to 40 pounds. Thoroughbred racing, or thoroughbred training, anywhere from 5 to 7 pounds. Ranch work, 10 to 40 pounds. Harness racing, 20 to 60 pounds. So you think about, if they're losing that much sweat, then you need to be replacing that with equal amounts of water. So um, horses will actually drink a lot. This is another, I think, flyer that should be printed and put in every barn. Kind of gives you that capillary refill time when you stick your thumb on their upper gum and how long it takes. 3 seconds or more, they're dehydrated. And then that skin pinch test, how long it takes to snap back. So, when we do sweat, animals and horses, it causes a decrease in the core temperature because we've got that evaporative cooling, but we do also lose a lot of electrolytes are lost in sweat, um, including sodium, chloride, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. Muscle cramps are also um, a huge factor when a horse becomes dehydrated, or they just haven't, even if they're just drinking water and they're not dehydrated, but they haven't been given electrolytes, they will get muscle cramps and have impaired nerve and brain function, maybe become a little bit staggery and coordinated, um, if you do not replace the electrolytes. So it's absolutely critical that we are replacing electrolytes. Sodium and chloride, which is plain salt. You add sodium and chloride together, and that is plain old white salt. And that is the most important electrolyte in the body. And it's the highest concentration, and we really need to make sure that we are the key ingredient in our electrolyte is sodium and chloride. Helps with hydration, helps with muscle firing, electrical firing, like actually causing those muscles to um, contract and release. We've got potassium. Oh, sorry, potassium. Um, it is, you see these positively and negatively charged electrolytes. It's just positive and negative because when you think about muscles contracting and releasing, it's actually an electrical impulse that is occurring, and it's electrolytes that have positive and negative charges that are actually causing those contractions, those electrical stimulations to occur, that muscles fire. So potassium helps to regulate nerve impulses and muscle contraction. We know that some horses um, that get the disorder HYPP, hyperkalemic periodic paralysis, they actually can't have a lot of potassium in their diet. And it's because um, their potassium channels are kind of like gates that are left ajar, left a little bit open, and this potassium just kind of leaks backward and forward, causing firing of those nerves and muscles when they're not supposed to, i.e., the twitching. Um, so, calcium. We think primarily of calcium when we talk about bones and teeth, but actually, um, whilst most of the calcium in the body is found in the bones and teeth, it is a positive electrolyte, and it, with magnesium and potassium, it's really, really important for normal muscle and tissue function and nerve function. Magnesium, magnesium gets a lot of airplay, but not necessarily as an electrolyte, right? Everybody wants to feed magnesium so that they feel like they're going to calm their horse. Magnesium, and this is where it comes from. There's always an element of truth to these fads. Magnesium is required for normal muscle function, especially for the relaxation of the muscle. So then folks take that statement and think, oh, if I feed copious amounts of magnesium, I'm going to be able to calm my horse. Horses are very rarely deficient in magnesium. It is important to have magnesium balanced in your electrolyte, but feeding copious amounts of extra magnesium, I mean, you've got to feed a lot of extra magnesium in order to calm your horse. But once you do that, you also start to interfere with other electrolytes and minerals. So I'm always wary. We talked earlier about the amount of weight loss, and it is really quite astonishing how much weight horses can lose um, after exercise. You know, fox hunting, all day fox hunting, can be up to 100 pounds these horses will lose. Endurance horses, 20 to 90 pounds um, during those really long races. So it's really important that we make sure our horses are super hydrated prior to the activity, especially for endurance horses or fox hunters or harness racing. We want to make sure that they are very hydrated and that we never withhold water. Okay. Here, so when we developed the DAC electrolyte, we looked at the actual sodium potassium chloride concentrations in sweat lost from typical activities in horses. So we haven't just taken electrolytes for people and tried to apply them to horses, but actually look at um, sweat losses in horses and what electrolytes primarily comprise and how much are they losing so that we can replace those electrolytes. You want to supplement shortly before, during, and after exercise. So during is really the longer exercise, right? Maybe you're ranch working, you can have a tube of electrolyte paste in your back pocket, or if you're doing endurance racing, they're always giving electrolytes during. Um, a lot of people that might best to be doing short exercise, maybe it's barrel racing or something, maybe it's just before or after. I don't like to add the electrolyte to the water bucket. Now, earlier I said you could put some salt in the water just to really force them to drink. But ideally, when we're doing electrolytes, I prefer to either put the powder on the feed and make sure they've consumed it, or to use the paste to make sure that they've consumed it all, because they're not going to, they need all of that dose at one time, and they're not going to drink the whole bucket of water immediately. So we want to make sure that we're actually getting them to eat that in a shorter amount of time. So sodium and chloride should be the primary ingredients, not sugar. If you look at a lot of electrolytes for people, they're full of sugar, and that's really just so that we want to drink them again because they taste good. Sugar, though, is counterproductive. It will block the uptake of some of those electrolytes. So we don't actually want to have a lot of sugar, any sugar in our electrolytes. The DAC electrolyte does not have any sugar. Um, Again, if we do not replace those electrolytes, you're going to see fatigue, muscle weakness, um, dehydration gets bad, we decrease that thirst response, and then we're really gone on the other side of the curve where it's very difficult to come back from that. When it comes to, say, endurance riding, people will make sure that the night before and after travel, morning of the ride, they're giving electrolytes. They're giving electrolytes throughout the vet stops. The endurance riding is are really, because they have vet stops throughout the ride, kind of forces rest stops and vet checks and horse checks, we can kind of use this as a guide for whether we have a day of show jumping or a day of 4-H competition or it's a rodeo or whatever, that throughout the day, every time your horse is getting a rest or a break, you know that you, every time they're drinking water, you could make sure if it's a long day and they're sweating a lot that they get some electrolyte. Post ride, we want to make sure that they're drinking water, and you must make sure that they're eating and drinking before you give a lot of electrolytes. Younger horses are all, and less fit horses, dark colored horses, unclipped horses, they also are ones that will struggle with the heat. Usually, just like us, we start to acclimatize to the summer heat. We don't often go from spring cold to hot summer, right? If we're exercising regularly, we're slowly getting used to that heat. Again, if you're going from a cooler climate to a hotter climate, you might want to make sure that you give your horse some time to adjust. Even just trailering is very tired. So factor that into, um, you know, exercise. Horses will lose around 7 to 10 pounds an hour when they're exercising from sweat losses on hot days. Um, so the DAC electroaid paste, salt, which is your sodium and chloride, potassium, calcium, an amino acid, glycine, and magnesium and phosphorus, all in that electrolyte in that paste. You can do up to 1 to 2 tubes daily or after competition or training. The electroaid powder has a little zinc and copper as well, and manganese. And usually people are using this as their daily supplement. You can, if you have a syringe, mix it with some water or some applesauce and turn this into a paste. But I find that the electroaid paste is slightly more concentrated. What you won't see is any sugar. So the last thing I'll leave you with, because it's not something that we think about often. We think about electrolytes, riding in cooler weather, those kinds of things. But we know that bugs in the gut, when they're digesting fiber, they create heat, right? And so that microbial metabolism produces a lot of heat. When horses are eating hay, they will produce heat. And so if that fiber is really stemmy and stalky, they're going to produce more internal heat. So utilizing really highly digestible fiber sources like beet pulp can help because you're also soaking that, so you're getting extra moisture. Or using something like the DDA. The DDA can increase fiber digestion, decreasing heat production. Also utilizing fat as an energy source as well, because fat doesn't create a lot of metabolic heat when it's digested. So use a lot of oil, bloom, and use the DDA definitely with your electrolyte in your summer program. So with that, I'll take any questions.